Giacomo Puccini is one of the great composers of the last century, and he wrote a number of operas, including Madame Butterfly, Tosca, and La Bohème. When he was in his early 60s, Puccini developed a terminal illness. Because he felt he had one more opera inside, he got to work, writing as quickly as his failing health would allow. He was working on the last scene of the opera called Turandot, a piece of which you have just heard called Nessun Dorma. Puccini died before this opera was finished in 1924. Not long after his death, and in consultation with his family, one of Puccini's students, Franco Alfano, in 1926, pulled together his notes and, going by what he knew his teacher's intentions, finished Turandot. In 1926, they presented the opera in a great premiere performance. It was a very emotional night, and the most dramatic moment came during the final scene, when they reached the final notes that had been Puccini's, written by his pen. The conductor stopped the orchestra and turned to address the audience, and with tears in his eyes, he said, "Thus far our master wrote. Now we must go on with his work." Then he turned to the orchestra and led them to a triumphant finish. That this opera is the story of the conversion of an ice princess through the power of love only heightens the need to continue the story. The power of love must go on. Thus far our master wrote. Now we must go on with his work. We must go on. We are called to continue with the maestro's work. What are our teacher's intentions? Well, 2 Timothy almost makes us feel as if we're reading someone else's mail. Did you notice that? I mean, it's a letter from Paul to Timothy. The author writes in the name of Paul, as writers often did in those days, in the name of a great teacher and authority. And Timothy was known elsewhere that we've read in the New Testament. But however, the message is for all of us. But by the time this letter was written, probably the first part of the 2nd century, at least one generation of early Christians has passed from the scene, and the church is struggling with issues of right teaching and perhaps a bit of discouragement. The author exhorts Timothy to remember where he came from. Or we might say who he came from. His mother and his grandmother were the ones who helped to make him who he was, a follower of Jesus. Simba in The Lion King is exhorted by Mufasa to remember who you are. You remember The Lion King? First, Simba sees his own reflection, then the face of his father. "You see, he lives in you," says Rafiki. Simba hears a familiar voice call his name, and he looks up, and his father's ghost-like image appears among the stars. "Look inside yourself," says the apparition. "You must take your place in the circle of life. Remember who you are." And then the vision fades. So too, Timothy is reminded of who he is because of who his grandmother and mother were, and how important that is in his life. We're reminded of the fact that women have often been the ones to pass the faith to other people's children as well as their own. At the time of Paul's death, and Paul wrote to Timothy from his heart, knowing that he was soon to be put to death. People in the Christian community were likely, and the disciples were likely, starting to feel very discouraged by all of this putting to death of the followers of Jesus. All this dying and being executed was an embarrassment and perhaps a scary thing for potential disciples. Perhaps they wanted a more respectable religion, a more pleasant and comforting one. They really wished the Christian life weren't so messy with all that suffering and struggle. How often have we heard that? We don't really want to talk about the messy and the struggle. So this letter to Timothy from Paul may have been sent to reach Timothy, who himself was wrestling with such issues and showing signs of wear and tear in his ministry. He might have been tempted to listen to voices that led him in other directions, or to conform to the culture around him in ways that would let the precious gift of his faith, handed down from his mother and grandmother, be extinguished. No, Paul says, instead he should rekindle the faith, rekindle the gift. A beautiful line from the passage, and one that is especially significant for us today in the United Church of Canada and here at First United in St. Bernard. We lift up our historic firsts, which is good. We should be proud of the things that we have done and started here in this community. And during this transition year, we will be remembering where we have been. Doing this serves to remind us of the still speaking God in the new day, to speak the truth and live lives faithful to the gospel that we have received, even if it causes discomfort and even embarrassment. Has our understanding of religion dwindled into only a source of comfort and feeling good? Or is God the one in whom we have placed our trust, even in the midst of loss and despair, even when facing the possibilities of embarrassment? Is God still with us? Do we hold on to that? Thus far, our Master wrote, now we must go on with his work. We must go on. One of the challenges or barriers in carrying on with this legacy is our attitude. Sometimes we simply feel that the task is too enormous, or we resist God's call because our dreams take us in different direction.